Good afternoon. Let's get some reaction to that GDP figure I just spoke about. Mandla Isaacs from Zehuti Advisory joins me now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Just explain the GDP figures to us.
So I think two headline figures were released today, and of course, good afternoon, Zinga. The first was around a quarter-on-quarter figure, which was just over 16%. So that's versus Q1 2020. And the second big, more terrifying figure was year on year. So versus Q2 this year versus Q2 2019. And that is the 51% contraction. That is quite astounding.
Was this expected?
Well, a major contraction was expected. As you know, we had already been in a recession pre-COVID-19 on the back of the Q4 2019 and the first quarter 2020. And certainly we were expecting a major contraction because what we are experiencing now is globally the biggest economic crisis or reduction in output since almost the Great Depression. And of course, we had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. And so we knew that, that lockdown, which took effect in late March, and then in earnest in sort of April, May, June, which is the core of this Q2 number, we knew that there was going to be a major contraction. And the only question was how much it was going to be. And as we've seen, it was really, really sharp.
So we know that even though there was so much contraction, agriculture contributed about 15.1% to growth, seeming to be the only industry which actually grew despite the lockdown and the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, so thankfully we're having a strong year in terms of the agricultural sector. So it had already been doing well coming out of Q1. We've seen good news from commodities such as citrus, sugar, some of the other fruits and vegetables, and just overall good conditions in the agricultural sector, which are expected to continue. And then, of course, agriculture was deemed an essential service or essential sector, and so did not face the same kind of restrictions that the rest of the economy did. So for all of those reasons, we're seeing very good figures coming out of the agriculture sector, which is heartening.
Okay, when we take a look at household spend, the only growth really seemed to be in communication, utilities, and for a very small percent education. How much do you think this will change in the next quarter in terms of what we see in growth now that the economy has been opened up a bit?
Yeah, so you were seeing there, the impact of people working from home, spending on connectivity, telecommunications, internet streaming services, and so we're expecting that will improve slightly and going into Q3. As you would have seen over the last couple of months, people have, as restrictions have lessened, people have started to tentatively, start going back to the shops again and making more, lifestyle or kind of discretionary purchases. But of course, you would expect that with the economic pressure that the South African consumer is under, coming out of a decade of low growth or non-existent growth, the recession and now COVID-19, you would still expect that pickup in spending to be relatively subdued when consumers are anxious and worried and having a sort of gloomy consumer sentiment. They tend not to spend as much. And then, of course, in general, the lifestyle impact of COVID-19 in terms of people being reluctant to go out and spend is going to be with us for some time to come. E-commerce will replace some of that, but certainly not all of it.
All right. I know there's been a lot of horror about this figure that's come out today. Worldwide, though, we're seeing contractions in GDP. So Britain contracted by about 20%. India, 23%, I think, in Q2. What's the issue with South Africa's, both at just over 16% and the 50% compared to other countries?
Certainly, having looked at, countries around the world, G20, OECD, some other countries, I'm seeing the same pattern, which is that we seem to have contracted almost twice as much as many other economies around the world, which is quite scary. I would suggest, I mean, one would have to do a bit more further analysis, but I would suggest that having had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, having banned, for the most part, things such as alcohol sales, cigarette sales, having just been extremely strict with our lockdown restrictions. Even early on, we don't have maybe perhaps the same size e-commerce sector as other countries. And so when shops were completely closed and all you could do was buy food and medicine, and then of course, even e-commerce was restricted early on. That would speak to why we had such a sharp contraction when many other countries did not necessarily restrict as much some of the economic activity that could take place.
Mandla Isaacs from Zehuti Advisory giving us some analysis on that GDP figure. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon.